just mention, as I do every time, that Critical Connections' purpose is to enhance and encourage critical writing in ceramics. And I'm happy to see so many of you here, especially when we don't have a guest speaker. But this is my acknowledgement of Kurt Bensley's request a few months ago that we talk about beauty. And he said beauty and skill, but in my research, I found more on beauty. So I hope you've had a chance to read the two items I sent out. There were two things that particularly interested me at the beginning. One was in the Schjeldahl article, in which he says, the merely attractive, pretty, glamorous, and merely pleasing, lovely, delectable are not beauty because they lack the element of belief and the feeling of awe that announces it. And that reference to the feeling of awe made me think about my philosophy of art professor, Dr. Mark Johnson, who was at Carbondale when I was there. He wrote Metaphor and Meaning with George Lakoff. And he used to tell us that there should be a seventh sense, and that should be aesthetic ecstasy. And the fact that when each of us feels something in response to a stimulation, we feel it in our gut. And it's different for all of us. And they talk about that a little bit, how there's a difference between our reactions to things, and particularly to things of beauty. And then I was also particularly interested in the way in which the article about David Hickey's writing goes kind of back and forth about whether there's meaning in beauty or an object of beauty or not. And I guess with those two objects in mind, or thoughts in mind, I'd like to just ask you to weigh in on your thoughts about beauty.
I'd like to weigh in on my thoughts about criticism from having read these two. I would ask who this Dave Dorsey, who is he writing for? Because, I have a master's degree. I have done a lot of writing. I've done a lot of reading, and I found this just unbearable. I got as far as Iris Murdoch and then just quit. It strikes me as somebody who, rather than starting and saying, this is what Hickey said, and this is what I think, he just assumes that everybody is going to have read all these things and is going to be able to discuss the fine points of all these references, music, literature, and I find it pretentious. So there's that.
Interesting. There's that. Yeah. Comments.
Elaine, I'd like to say thanks for bringing these two articles forth. They're of interest to me, and I think they launch us into a discussion that is important for writing, essential for writing. And I think they did, Schjeldahl's was particularly good, I thought, in describing what beauty is in its kind of nebulous quality. You can't quite get a hold of it, right, but you sort of know it when it's there. One question I had was, what stimulated you? I mean, it was obviously Curtis' comment, which I think is appropriate given the nature of his work. But what stimulated you to put these two articles forth?
Well, Anna actually brought to me the Hickey article, which she said she had used in some classes. And she might be able to answer your question, Janet, for whom is he this Dave Dorsey writing. And then I'm just a Schjeldahl fan. So when I saw his name come up when I was doing a little research, I thought that he's always worth a read. And may he rest in peace. I was sorry to
Isn't it
hear
interesting
of
though
his
that
passing.
Schjeldahl defines beauty in terms of your reaction to it, not
Mhm.
in terms of any physical, visual, whatever quality.
Yeah, and he does. I don't. I've got it in front of me, but I can't pinpoint where. But he does bring in the subjective. Maybe not using that word, but that it isn't the same for everybody. And that's the point that Mark Johnson was making. That and when I do a workshop on finding your own aesthetic, I work with that. To have students analyze and bring in images of things that move them aesthetically, that give them that aesthetic ecstasy, and then to see it and to then explore the qualities of those objects, and then to see how the rest of the class responds to that person's artwork, and to see if those elements are actually in their own work, but to tie into and gain an understanding of their own aesthetics. But
Is
anyway,
the beauty that we're talking about here the same as what they used to call the sublime? Can anybody answer that? I cannot.
anybody?
Like it fits in the same category. I mean, the sublime. Yeah, I'm not as familiar. I mean, I've read some stuff historically about that, but I can't really answer your question. But it seems like it fits into the same category of a quality that is, again, since elusive, but we know it when we get there. So, you may be right there.
One thought that comes to me, and you mentioned it in your introduction, Elaine, that I think skill is an intriguing phenomena. In the one article that I enjoyed the most too was with Peter Schjeldahl, but to me, he kind of took refuge in things that are indescribable or hard to define, and I'm just intrigued. Skill, unless I missed the boat somewhere significantly, skill has historically been an element in most concepts of beauty. It's curiously been shunted to the side in the contemporary art world, and I'm not sure if that is because it was considered to be not inclusive enough, meaning that only certain people could achieve a certain level of skill, and that is by its nature an exclusive club. But I really don't understand it, and I don't understand why beauty needs to be defined in a way that it only deals with things, an indescribable emotion. I mean, part of my fascination in the field of ceramics is going back throughout history and identifying inspiring works of art in every culture. And one of the curious unifying qualities that they all seem to have is that they all incorporate an incredible level of skill in pursuit of this ideal of beauty, whether that ideal of beauty is, from Asia, from Western Europe, from the Americas. I mean, they all had different ways of expressing what they felt was beautiful, but I can't think of one example that was just poorly done intentionally. And I've thought about it. I mean, I've said there's got to be an example of some culture that just made things horribly bad as an expression of beauty, and I don't think it's out there. I think it's always been an integral element in the concept of beauty, and yet for whatever reason, I can't explain it, we have chosen to shunt skill to the side as if it was not part of any intelligent aesthetic. I'm quite frankly, to myself, it would be one of the core principles of an intelligent aesthetic.
Anna?
Yeah, and Curtis, we did have a conversation a little while back with an article by Dormer, and of course, skill was like primary thing. Some of my reaction to this in terms of beauty is that lots of the work, and we kind of talked about that also with regards to skill, I think, that a lot of the work almost fights hard not to be beautiful. Like there's a trend in work, some contemporary ceramic work where there's almost a battle not to be beautiful, that being beautiful is sort of fluff and perhaps not as important as some other ideas that might come forward, whether they be abstraction or something else. But that article was a synopsis of Hickey's book, The Invisible Dragon, which is essays on beauty. So it's the entire book is a group of essays by David. And I just found that this person, at least, and I'm not arguing with you about tone and some of the other things that you mentioned, Janet, but it helped to kind of condense or put together a lot of the topics that he discusses in this book. So that's a little bit where that came from.
What about in the question of skill? What about the Japanese tea bowls that were just peasants' rice bowls and were elevated by the tea masters? Would we, I would think that we can't assume that the skill of those bowls was what made them valuable, but maybe beauty wasn't either. I don't know if that applies.
Well, I mean, I can address that. I mean, having studied traditional ceramics for most of my life, I know that it's easy to achieve a level of competence in making objects, but it's harder to turn that competence into skillful mastery. And skillful mastery incorporates a facility that doesn't come easy and is never available in work that's simply competent. So, I mean, I think what they were looking at in the Korean work was the fact that perhaps some of the Japanese and Chinese work was a bit stilted in their pursuit of perfection. They probably mistakenly thought perfection was rigid and structured and formal and perfect in that sense. But I think a more enlightened perspective incorporates not chance occurrence, but human, our ability to not be perfect. Well, I was thinking of Mark Gaudy's work. Gaudy wrote I thought, an interesting article about his fascination with mathematically generated artwork. And the one thing and I love Mark's work, but the one thing that Mark's work does not have was much evidence of the human hand or touch. And I haven't addressed it with him, but I'm planning to at some point, to see how he perceives this aesthetic that he's developing. I mean, to me, the absence of human touch, any visible human touch, is a fault in the work, or not a fault, but absence. It's something that it should be there but isn't. And so I think, going back to what you're saying, I think in some of the rigid, perfect work that was coming out of these refined cultures, probably lacked evidence of human touch that the Koreans came through the back door to achieve, if you follow that. I think incorporating the human touch into any object of beauty is going to elevate it to a higher level than simple mastery or rigid perfection.
It's
think
interesting that you go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, I think beauty is a moving target. Every culture, every time has its relationship to what beauty is, because beauty comes out of particular time frames and perspectives, and it's not continual. And our contemporary relationship with beauty is always changing. Now with AI and the fact that there are many artists who direct their work to be done by others, I listened to a talk that Jeff Koons gave, and how he was questioned by the panel, how he felt that his work reached the objective of being, heartfelt art when he had no actual hand in the work. And he said that, his direction, it's almost like a film director, his direction to have the art made was his hand in the work. And, the final product was a reflection 100% of how he viewed the art. And Adam Chell, who spoke in my small little Otis seminar, was showing pieces that he's now made through AI and questioning what we think of as beautiful in terms of homoerotic art. And that also made me think about this huge database out there of images, that beauty can now be so manipulated to be almost, individualized, that each one of us on this Zoom screen can search for our connection with beauty through AI. And I'm sure we will all come up with very different patterns and images and associations. The way I learned about beauty from a class on Renaissance art that Charles Seymour taught was that beauty was ecstasy. And I think it was grounded in his idea of the Renaissance, the association of art with religion. And I still think, in a way, that beauty for each person individually, if it can reach that sublime or that ecstatic moment, then that's what we all try to, as makers, we try to reach that high bar. And as consumers of visual imagery, we are constantly looking for a spark that will send us into that place of ecstasy.
That was the aesthetic ecstasy, I think, that Mark Johnson was talking about, that is so individual. But talking about the presence of the hand, I was just in a studio in China, a porcelain potter, and he was making these exquisite little tea bowls and celadon, porcelain celadon. And I kept looking around the studio for molds. There was no evidence of the hand. And he could stack them and they were perfect, but they were all hand thrown. And so then I questioned that work. He's a student, but he's doing this exquisite work. And so they were beautiful, but the mark of the hand was not there. It would be like sitting down to Lenox China, maybe.
Well, and that's sort of the essence of what I'm saying. I think it's curious too that in the field of ceramics, I think we're in an odd situation in history, because what we have historically valued, probably more than most disciplines, the human touch, is becoming probably more significant as AI, as Joe mentioned, AI is becoming accessible for everyone, and anybody can replicate pretty much anything they've seen, or in some cases even can imagine. But I mean, the one thing AI is going to have a little trouble replicating is human touch, and that emotional and inner space that happens when we're touching something and intentionally doing it. So I guess part of my concern is that although we seem to have an aesthetic, historic in ceramics, we seem to have an aesthetic that is incredibly well positioned at this point in time to be recognized as valuable. We spend a lot of time chasing after popular trends in the fine art world, which, like Jeff Koons, I mean, he's got nothing going forward. And so And I mean, I can go through a lot of these people. I mean, I read an article in the yesterday about these who was it? Ron Muck and hyper realistic, babies splattered with blood. So I mean, once you get over the grotesque, eye-popping concept that he came up with, I mean, there's nothing there that AI couldn't do in a week of programmed behavior. So I guess my frustration is I think that we seem to be on the precipice of missing the boat completely in terms of promoting an aesthetic that contradicts much of what the fine art world has to offer. But we have a wealth in.
I think you can carry that back, the Koons kind of thing, in my mind, back to Duchamp, because I've always had difficulty with him in terms of presenting an object of beauty. I mean, he didn't put his hands on things. He just proclaimed, which was, much more of an intellectual exercise, and yet it gained such traction in so many people's situation. It seemed like there was a comment in one of the articles that talked about beauty being not generational or not culturally defined, but something that was almost eternal. I forget the exact words, but I think if you look at instances of beauty in different cultures, then some of the same elements of relationship to the viewer, the person that appreciates them, reappear again and again. And one example I saw of this a couple of months ago, we were in Santa Fe and saw an exhibition about Native American clay. And their clay, it seemed to have roots, which it does both tactily, where they dig the clay, how they dig the clay, the attitude in which they make their pieces, and then how they're appreciated in the culture. And I thought it was an exquisite example of beauty and how it's created, because it assembles all those relationships, including skill. I agree totally with Kurt that skill is an essential element there. But I think it's hard. I guess I've been looking for something beyond a culturally or time period specific definition of beauty, because it seems like, in fact, that beauty is found, as we've seen in the Renaissance. It's found in the Impressionist. It's found in other situations. So there are elements there of how we respond to it and what it takes to create it that I think are almost universal and can be brought forward really in looking at any cultural or any work of art.
And I don't know if you can hear me. I'm driving. I'm sorry if the sound isn't good. And if it's not good, I'll just withdraw. But you all prompted some thinking. And in terms of the issue of beauty, what I'm wondering about is sort of the who is the we. I have trouble imagining one definition, even if there's a skill involved. I think of the Museum of Art and Design and its sloppy craft shows that have existed. Is it Sterling Ruby, who some just hated, while others will go only to the Met to see certain types of ceramics, or one who doesn't maybe appreciate wood-fired work. If I take novices, people who just are curious, they dislike the browns, and they want something shiny, the sails blue. I realize this is sort of naive in a way, but I also think, Elaine, you've come back from China. I worked a lot in international relations. I think of the beauty of the body in scarification in some cultures, others who put the rings around their necks. we're hired next, despite all the, the death that can come. I just see it as such an individualistic definition that it's almost as if we all carry a different dictionary. So to come up with a singular view makes me wonder. And my very last point would be, there's a New Yorker article that Elaine's articles prompted me to read. The gentleman who had died in 2019, the writer from, I guess, lung cancer, had written about death. But in it, there's a section that I'll send around, just one paragraph, where he imagines looking at pieces that he doesn't like as an art critic, and imagines if he appreciated them, how he would think about it. And I really took that paragraph sentence to heart, that he could step outside his personal definition of beauty to imagine speaking to a wider world.
Interesting. Yeah, good comments. Judy.
I have a little bit of a cold, so I'm sorry if I'm not going to be so clear. But I wanted to first off say that what I loved about Schjeldahl's article was that in itself, I found the article itself to be beautiful. And the reason I say that is because while I was reading the words, they conjured up in me feelings and emotions that were making me recall things that I've seen in my life that I found to be very beautiful. And so for that emotional response, I really have to thank him for that. I was honored to hire him to teach aesthetics and critical writing at NYU. And so I had a chance to meet with him, kind of regularly. He was a very quiet guy, but whenever he spoke, it was with intent and realism that made every encounter so memorable. So I particularly enjoyed this article that he wrote on beauty. And now I want to get to some of the points that were made, and that is, there is a big difference to me of objects like Duchamp and Koons, and even now with Adam Chow, because I just interviewed him as well using his AI. And that is that their intentions, I do not believe, was to create art for its beauty. Their intention was entirely different. And if we go into intention, I think that makes a big difference in how we analyze that concept of beauty. All of these people that I've mentioned are dealing with a different kind of content for the appreciation or understanding of the artist's voice. The artist's voice doesn't all the time have to be about creating beauty. There are other motivations besides that. And if you're only going to focus on looking at an object and analyzing it in terms of its beauty, then I think we're missing the point of what a lot of contemporary art, and even art, let's say, of Duchamp, of that period is not about. Guernica, which Schjeldahl hits home on, is true when he says that it's not about beauty. It is about a different kind of orientation, and therefore I think you can't bundle this all together. And we should just be, one of the great things I'd love to do, Elaine, is to continue this conversation, is to actually have a projection of beautiful objects that we actually put up on the screen and then talk about as passionately as Schjeldahl has about the emotional and theoretical, I guess, if you want, response in our body language and our feeling about what that object means to us in terms of its beauty. And Adam Chow's recent use of AI with his imagining gay Chinese figures. It was about a blending of ideas from different cultures and putting it together in a contemporary context. And therefore, I don't really think he's after the word beauty in his work. Anyway, those are my thoughts. And I would love to have, maybe the next time we might continue this conversation, for actually projecting objects of beauty and having each share that emotional response that transforms us.
Interesting comments. One thing I wanted to say that was that the article on Dave Hickey quotes from, for him, the struggle to make something beautiful forces an artist to cede power to the viewer. The artist has to beguile, not lecture. I found that to be an interesting comment, that most of us don't make our art for the viewer.
That's right.
Anyway, yes, Janet.
I'd just like to contribute here that when I first started writing about art, and was looking at lots of stuff and was just, my horizons were opening enormously, I had a really exceptional reaction to 3 different shows. 2 of them were ceramics, interestingly enough, but one was a person, Mike Norman of Minnesota, who I bet nobody here has ever heard of, but and the other was Robert Turner, and the third one was Drilled Boulders by Noguchi. Now, in all 3 of those cases, I had a huge emotional reaction, but I would then and now not have described those things as particularly beautiful. What to me they had was somehow a sense of what do I say? Of being alive, of having a kind of spirit. The Robert Turner pieces were some of his, I've forgotten the name of the series, but African hut-like sculptures. And when I saw them, it felt like a family to me. It felt like it was, a living being. And the same thing with those Noguchi boulders, although they had nothing figurative about them at all. But in that case, I was in a gallery on a Saturday and it was crowded, and I actually thought I was going to cry, and I felt like I was not in touch with the floor anymore. I just had this huge reaction. But, if I'm going to describe something as beautiful, I mean, the way that gets used is like exquisite colors or perfection of workmanship or those kinds of things, none of which were present in those 3 extraordinary examples. And of course, I've seen a gazillion things since then, but somehow, maybe just because I was new to it, I have not mostly had a repeat of that kind of emotional reaction.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, hearing you describe those, and you say none of those 3 objects or bodies of work had any of those qualities that you could use to define beauty. In defining any of those 3 bodies of work, did any of them seem to have, did they lack a sense of beautiful coloration, or did they I mean, I'm trying to picture a Noguchi work that lacked, appropriate coloration, or lacked any, Robert Turner's work, I think they in general were beautifully colored. And well, I'm not talking about, defining it solely by coloration, but I'm saying I think that to me it's all those qualities are in there when I'm talking about a beautiful object. I'd just be curious to know what quality that you would hear people talking about when they're defining beauty that wasn't in one of those three bodies of work. Were any of them ugly?
If I think of beauty like a sunset, don't we all talk about sunsets being beautiful? What is it there? It's the color. It's not the promise of a sunrise, so it doesn't have that kind of emotional suggestion. What is it then about a sunset that's beautiful? but color. If you have a stormy sky or something like that and you don't have color, would you still call it beautiful? When it comes to a made object, well, other than following Judy's suggestion and having pictures, but I like color personally, but I wouldn't say that any of those three experiences that I had anything to do with that or precise workmanship either. So that's why.
What about wonderment? You talk about a sunset and there's something fleeting and something wonderful. You sort of can't believe it's true. I mean, there's a kind of out of body experience that just takes your breath away. And that's what I think Schjeldahl was aiming at in this beautiful language that he uses. There is something about beauty, if you're only talking about that experience, that your body does leave your mind, or your mind leaves your body. I don't know, it gives you chills, it sends ripples down your spine. There are those thrilling moments that you experience, and I don't say it's too often, but there are there are possibilities. Sunset, natural things of beauty. Looking, to me, peering down into the Grand Canyon was just beautiful. I mean, when it comes to natural beauty, I mean, I think that's a universal, is it not? And if we're going to try to find a universal among objects, then it's best. I mean, I think you have to be in the presence of an object. I don't think you can experience it through a photograph, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I think you have to be in the moment of its presence. Either it's sheer sky. I mean, look at the Stella. If you've been to Bilbao, it's probably the most thrilling encounters of a work of art it was almost like a sunset to me. You walk into this cavernous space that you're completely surrounded by these tons and tons of steel that you're sure is going to fall down on top of you. But on the other hand, that sense of gravity, that sense of scale, the color, the form, and the sheer size of it takes your breath away. I mean, that's all I could say. And to me, that was so beautiful. It had no other message but just beauty. And it there wasn't any other, well, I guess there's content there too that I could write about, but it's a physical experience that you have to be in the moment with that object.
I think that's a great example. Go ahead, Janet.
Maybe it's a matter of learning, that you're looking at something that does something that you didn't know it could, whether it's scale or whatever. It's the newness or the that new information to you that you get from the piece. Maybe that's
right.
what we're calling beauty. I don't know.
I would hate to define beauty by what it's not, but in listening and thinking about what you're saying, and I go back to the sunset. The one unifying characteristics of all sky phenomena that I've ever seen is that they're all perfectly done. I've never looked at the sky and said, "Oh shit, that guy screwed that one up." And it doesn't matter if it's beautiful coloration or dark foreboding sky. They're all perfectly done. And I think as a maker, I know when I'm in my studio and I'm looking at what I'm doing and what I'm trying to create myself, more often than not, I define my success by the number of faults that aren't there. I mean, if I was ever blessed to do something that I thought was truly beautiful, it would probably be defined by the fact that it was devoid of mistakes. And I think that's what we see in nature. I mean, you can go from one natural phenomenon to another, and the one unifying quality that they all have is there are no mistakes. I mean, even things that would seem like a mistake, like a flood or some sort of devastating storm, they're perfect in what they are. So they don't have to be pleasant or pablum or positive. they can be horribly frightening, but they are perfect in what they are. And like I said, I mean, I've never looked at a natural phenomena and noticed a mistake. And I think that,
Mhm.
and I hate to say it, but that ties into the concept of skill, because I mean, how skillful would it be to create a sunset? I mean, incomprehensible to me, but to me, that's the defining quality.
Sue, did you have a comment there?
Yeah, I'm not a ceramicist. I'm kind of a multimedia artist, so I'm a little bit out of my depth here. But I am surrounded by natural beauty pretty much 24/7 because I live in Western Wyoming, and I feel like nature is almost a heavy hand on artists in our area. I try never to look out the window when I'm trying to make art because it's going to try to tell me what to do, and that's a lack of imagination I can't allow happen. The other piece I just want to mention while I've got the floor here is that in the Schjeldahl piece, what I love about his writing is that he finds beauty in being challenged. And he says, sometimes the object of beauty is not just unexpected, but bizarre, with an aspect I initially consider odd or even ugly. Such experiences are revolutions of taste, insights into new or alien aesthetic categories. And that's exactly what I treasure the most when I go look at art I haven't seen before, and it turns my head inside out. And maybe I hate it the first time I see it. And whatever that intangible, inexplicable thing is that makes you go back and look again, or maybe it's just luck, that makes you feel like your brain is growing. To me, that's the best part about what we're talking about here. You know, that little tickle in your head, and the Iris Murdoch examination by Dave Dorsey, where he equates, or maybe she's equating, beauty and the creation of art as a kind of moral process of becoming a better person. Becoming a better person is the same process as the one that leads to becoming a better artist. I have to chew on that now for a long time. Thanks.
Thanks, Sue.
It's interesting that we're talking about singular objects, more or less, except for Janet brought up, and I will concur with her, that my sense of beauty sometimes emanates from actual exhibitions. It's the way they're organized. It's the way that they're thoughtfully written about in the didactic panels. It's the way that the writers lead me to understand the beauty of the work that I did not expect or did not know. And I'd conjecture that there's also beauty in organization of art, that you can see something much differently when someone else is presenting it in a manner that leads you to another transformative place. And I would say for me, it was the Eva Hesse, I know it's Eva Hesse, but she was American, so it's Eva Hesse exhibition that was at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. I'm not sure, it's probably organized out of New York, but that's where I saw it. And I had that same wonderment that Judy was talking about. I had that need to go back to look at the work with new eyes. Every time I went from one room, I went back to the next. And I think that maybe beauty, or the understanding of what makes us feel that transmutation is also a learning experience. Like Schjeldahl says, a challenge. Maybe it's because we didn't know it internally, and then we considered it externally, and then it came back to us. So, I mean, it's hard. I know I'm sure there are many objects that I've thought have been beautiful in my life. And Curtis, you've made many of them, because I happen to love repeating patterns. But I think that the amalgam of something makes a bigger impact on my idea of what beauty is. So maybe that's why I like to curate shows, hoping that someday I will give someone the experience that I had in an Eva Hess show.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to get back to having to be in the real moment to experience the beauty. I have to say that the reason why the sunsets are so powerful is because when you're in it, it just that feeling of awe and wonderment, as I mentioned before, but a picture of it just isn't the same. And being in with the Sarahs, also being in the moment of the experiential aspect of it, I think has to be part of it. I also want to draw attention to the fact that it happens for example, for me, when I go to the ballet, the New York City Ballet, particularly when this past season they had Jessica Parker, whatever her name is on the board of the New York City Ballet, and she is a great costume person, and so she brought to the ballet a sense of asking costume designers, to design for the ballet. So here we had a collaboration of the most incredible, imaginative Swarovski gems on costumes, combined with incredible music, combined with incredible choreography, a new choreographer, and then combined with an orchestra that played magnificently. And when you have the synergy of all of these things coming together and being in the moment of experiencing it and being so fleeting, that kind of fleeting, like the way a sunset falls away, you can only be in that moment. And then you're experiencing a ballet, which is only that moment. Well, that also adds to the excitement and that wonderment. And you don't see it again. I mean, it's hard, it just is, it's just a fleeting passing, and you feel so privileged, so privileged that you had that incredible experience that you felt was just for you. And I think that's, again, what Schjeldahl is using with his language. And I have been around objects that have made me feel that way, and it's just fleeting. I don't know, like the Eva Hess show, you're absolutely right. They're so incredible to see the work that she's done and how she's done it. Or the Calder, the circus, I mean, they're just things that you just remember from your experiences of seeing beauty. And it doesn't happen very often. It's rare. And maybe that's why beauty is so elusive, because we don't see it too often. And I'm glad for it when it's rare, because I can appreciate it all the more when I am in that sense of awe.
And there is that ephemeral quality that you're talking about, where it is. And then how many of us take a picture of that sunset trying to capture it, and it of course can't be captured, and trying to share it or whatever. But there is another comment in the Schjeldahl article that I wanted to point out, and he said, and this goes back to what you were talking about those moments don't happen very often. Beauty's value as a profound comfort, a reconciliation with life, inevitably wanes when when ordinary life is replete with comforts, notably including less frequent exposure to the ugly. The beautiful meant more before indoor plumbing. I loved that. It is all relative to our experiences, and And as artists and writers, and Janet's in New York, you put yourself in the position of seeing art and really inviting those feelings into your life, even since indoor plumbing.
One thing that occurs to me, excuse me, Anna, but in listening to Joe and Judy both, to me, what you guys were doing, you're sort of expanding this concept of beauty that I'm struggling to identify, and by incorporating more people and working together, they create a more magnificent sense of beauty in a way. That to me was very helpful, because then I would have to, then I turn that around and say, okay, so we all know that if you're, say, in Joe's situation, she's curating an exhibition, and the writing has to be perfect, the placement has to be perfect, all these elements have to come together and be done well for it to turn out the way people would perceive it to be beautiful. One thing that can't happen is nobody can screw up. So that's to me, one unifying characteristic. Nobody can make a horrible mistake and have it turn out well. But then as a maker, I have to take all that information and synthesize it back into my personal one body creative activity. And I have to orchestrate myself to operate the same way Joe's exhibition team would operate. And I have to make sure that I don't make any mistakes myself in creating this work. And again, I'm not to beat a dead horse, but to me, that is, again, the essence of skill, is being able to orchestrate yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, your physical activity, to create something that has no mistakes in it.
Anna, you had a
Curtis,
comment?
Curtis, you strive in your work.
That's right. I had my hand up before.
I'm
and-
sorry. I'm sorry.
Go, Anna,
ahead.
go ahead. We'll come back to you, Judy.
Well, and this is actually connected to what you and Janet were talking about in terms of seeing an exhibition, that maybe we don't think of the word beauty as the first thing. I was thinking, it made me think back. This was early 70s. I think I was still an undergrad, went to MoMA with a friend and walked in totally naive about Francis Bacon. And seeing those first, these huge paintings of his distorted figures, my first reaction was the opposite. But as I walked through the show, that to this day, that was my undergraduate, it's in the 70s. I still did to this day think it was one of the most powerful shows I have ever seen. And that whole idea of awe and wonder and all that stuff. By the time I walked out the other end of that show, I had all those feelings, but I wouldn't call the work beautiful. So, that's, I think that's where it starts to get a little trickier. It's some of those shows that you're talking about.
That's exactly my point. That's exactly, and what I was saying about the content is different. It's not geared toward beauty. It's geared towards something else. But Curtis, I wanted to say, in piggybacking on what Anna just said and what you just said, when I look at your work and I see the content of your work, to me, you are striving and working and achieving beauty in your work. I have to say that your motivations are of a different ilk than the motivations of Bacon in his painting. Okay. And so, motivation is a lot in terms of what you're striving toward. And for me, you achieve that. And so I think motivation is, and the content of what you're dealing with makes a big difference in how we evaluate beauty.
Well, because you mentioned me like on the political debates, I think I get a minute. But I hear what you're saying, but I would disagree, and I would just compare the motivation to the different motivation of a thunderstorm and a peaceful spring sky. I mean, one can be awe-inspiring and frightening, and one can be pleasant and comforting. And so I'm not concerned with the motivation. I'm concerned with the execution. And and I like Bacon's work too. But I mean, to me, the execution is without flaw, and that's where I find the beauty.
Mm.
No, I thought also, and Francis Bacon, when I read this, another person is Basquiat's work that I saw recently in Seattle. And I looked at it and came back to it and then came back to it. And as I looked at it more, it did the same thing that I think the experience you had with Bacon is that you can't turn away from it. I mean, it's got so much there, even though Bacon's work is very difficult. I mean, it's hard to take. But putting that next to Curtis is an interesting juxtaposition. But I think it reflects the fact that the elements of beauty are really quite diverse, that you can't put it all in.
Wait, go lie down. Down.
What happened? Yeah, that but
Down.
the sunset situation also there's I think clearly demonstrate there's a whole realm of things happening that we almost subconsciously take in or affect our perception, because we know that the earth is turning, all the astrological things. Sometimes we can't put our finger on it, but it's present. And so I think it's important. And to me, that then opens the door to seeing beauty in cultures, and, in many different cultures, in many different things. But that element of, when we talked about ecstasy and those experiences, I think are present in many different ways. And it was another thought there, it just went out. But anyway, that sense that you can look at something that is difficult or very much opposite of what you normally look for, and in fact there is nurture and the benefits of beauty also.
And going back to Kurt's discussion on skill, our guest last month was Linda Sorman. And I wouldn't say that beauty is one of the qualities of her work, but certainly skill is. And I'm eliciting a few grins out there, I can see. but I thought that the juxtaposition of this discussion after seeing her work was interesting, because I find I've only seen her work in person once. And as I mentioned last month, I wanted to be able to climb inside of it. It was tabletop work at the Scripps exhibition. And I was fascinated by it, but I didn't find it beautiful at all. But yeah.
What's some of the other words you would use for it, Elaine?
Well, I didn't feel like I had enough time to delve into it. So it was intriguing to me. It made me want to spend more time with it. And it also made me want to be able to see some of the larger work in person and just get a greater understanding. And it actually kind of led to me inviting her, because it wasn't typical beautiful form, or I don't think she's going for beauty at all. And yet I think she's quite successful.
Yeah, I would also add provocative and compelling, and actually scary in some of her new works now, of rather threatening and scary for me. They soar over your head. They diminish your feeling of well-being. there's a kind of element of that fierceness that disturbs you.
Mhm.
And disturbs me. And so it's a different set of parameters that we're looking at, and beauty is certainly not one of them. I agree.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, we're at our end time, but any other closing comments here? And I like the idea of possibly continuing this conversation as was mentioned.
It'd be nice
It's
to
been-
see somehow finding it, this discussion finding itself in a larger audience. But I think it also points very definitely toward the need for the critical thinking, that you're not just taking one element, the color of a sunrise or sunset, but many different things. So I think it's encouragement for Elaine, what you're doing and how other people are participating.
Yes, and I think I mentioned earlier at one point in the Hickey article, he talks about, I mean, it's talks about, if it's beautiful, you can't find meaning in it. And I totally disagree with that. It's like Garth Clark's comment that you can't write critically about pots, and which I totally disagree with also. But and then he says that what is beauty in and of itself? The question is unanswerable. Well, I think we've answered it somewhat today, and that it is different for each of us. And then he says it's
think
better.
as writers, Elaine, I'm sorry, do you think as
No, go
writers
ahead.
we are limited by language? I mean, it's the definition of beauty, the idea of speaking about beauty oftentimes is what it's not more than what it is. And I think that maybe Schjeldahl, the reason why everybody is so responsive to his articles, because he's a poet as well as a prose writer, and he's able to use language in a way that is visceral. And I think that we have to expand our language for beauty, because I think we have to assume that our readers don't know what beauty is either. I mean, we don't. We can't,
No.
we've been spending an hour trying to define what it is or not define it. So I would advocate for us all to have an exercise in trying, what is that, phenomenology, just trying to come up with ways that could be descriptive.
You
Yeah.
make some very good points, Joe. But I and I agree with you. Language is everything. But Elaine, I do have to say that I think we did a very good job of agreeing on some aspects of beauty. I think we all agreed to the awe-ness of it, AWE, and the wonderment and the phenomena of natural beauty that we all seem to have agreed upon, which I think is no small feat. And I want to congratulate you and us and for this delightful, wonderful conversation that sort of charges me up in ways of feeling really good about this conversation that I haven't felt about in a long time, with all of you sharing your passion toward language and toward beauty. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome, Judy, and thank you all for coming.
Yes,
It's great.
And I think we should do what Judy recommends to continue the conversation, is to bring forward something that we all find beauty in, and then try to describe it, because that will expand our vocabulary.
Well, we can do that next month if you want. If we ask, I can ask everyone who attends to bring one image, and
love it.
We can do that next month, because I think this has been stimulating and interesting.
No sunsets.
No sunsets. No sunsets.
So maybe we delimit. Why don't we delimit it to an actual object? And if Curtis, maybe Jim, you want to bring a ceramic object, do you want to limit it to that, or do you want it? Can it be any object at all?
I think it can be any object in my
Okay.
estimation, because not everyone is who comes is a 3D artist.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
let's do that. And I'll get an email out to that effect. Good.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks for
Thank
coming.
You.
Nice to see everybody.
Same
Thanks.
here.
Feel better, Judith.
Thank you, dear. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.